Imagine this. A sweltering summer in 1518, the narrow cobbled streets of Strasbourg baking under the sun. Suddenly a woman steps out, her movements jerky and unnatural. She begins to dance. Not a joyful jig, not a celebratory waltz, but a frantic, unceasing shuffle. There's no music, no partner, no hint of pleasure on her face, just the relentless slap of bare feet against ancient stone. By the time the sun dips below the horizon, her face is a mask of gray exhaustion, her shoes are torn to shreds, and her heels are bleeding. And yet she dances on. This wasn't a performance, it was a plague. Within a week, a dozen of her neighbors had joined her, pulled into the same bizarre, involuntary rhythm. Within a month, the city counted 400 people, men, women, and even children, twisting, leaping, and convulsing in an agonizing, endless dance. Many collapsed, their bodies giving out under the sheer brutal strain, dying from strokes, heart attacks, or simply from utter exhaustion. The city council, in a move that seems utterly baffling to us now, hired pipers and drummers, even built a stage, and told the afflicted to keep going. Why? Because the doctors of the day, with their limited understanding of the human body, insisted the only cure was to dance the hot blood out. So they danced until they died, and 5 centuries later, we still don't know exactly why. It's one of history's most chilling and most baffling medical mysteries. Chapter 1: The Spark. Let's set the scene. Strasbourg, July 1518. Europe is still reeling, trying to shake off a particularly brutal 15th century hangover. The last plague wave had wiped out a third of the population in many areas, leaving a gaping wound in society. Granaries were often half empty, and the summer months brought the constant dread of smallpox, mercilessly snatching away toddlers and infants. People whispered, their voices hushed with fear, that God was angry, that these were signs of divine displeasure. And in the thick air of superstition and anxiety, another whisper circulated. Tales of St. Vitus, the patron saint of dancers, who, it was believed, could strike sinners with an uncontrollable, dancing curse. The psychological landscape was already primed for something strange. Into this cauldron of tension and dread walked Frau Trophäa. She wasn't an outcast or a vagrant. Contemporary chronicles describe her as a respectable 30-something housewife. One sweltering Tuesday morning near the bustling fish market, something snapped. She simply set her body in motion, and as eyewitnesses swore, she could not stop. From dawn to vespers, she danced. Without rest, without food, without music, she moved. Those who saw her later described her face, writing that it looked as if she stared through the world into hell. It was a vacant, terrifying expression, devoid of joy or even consciousness. Most onlookers at first probably chuckled, thinking it a strange performance or perhaps a woman gone mad with heat. But their laughter died in their throats when, the next morning, she was still at it. By the third day, the soles of her feet were a mangled mess, blistered to the size of walnuts, many of them burst open, leaving raw, bleeding flesh. Still, she stamped, shuffled, and spun. That was when the chuckles turned to gasps, the amusement to genuine horror. Neighbors stopped laughing and instead started praying, convinced they were witnessing something truly unholy, a curse made manifest. This wasn't just bizarre. It was deeply unsettling, a public torment that was impossible to ignore. Chapter 2: The Spread. Day 4 arrived, bringing with it a desperate attempt to break the curse. Frau Trophäa's husband, likely a man consumed by terror and exhaustion himself, dragged her to the local chapel of St. Vitus. Priests chanted ancient blessings, splashed holy water over her, pressed sacred relics to her knees, hoping to exorcise whatever demon possessed her. But it was all in vain. The rituals had no effect. She returned to the street, her feet still moving, her body still compelled by an unseen force, On day 5, the unthinkable happened. A second woman, then a third, joined Frau Trophäa in her macabre dance. It was like watching a ripple spread across a pond, but instead of water, it was pure, unadulterated terror. Within 48 hours, 30 people were jerking and twisting in erratic circles, their movements growing increasingly frenzied. Their eyes were glassy, vacant, reflecting nothing but the internal torment. Their skin, slick with sweat despite the cool summer air, shimmered under the sun. Children, ever the mimics, started to copy the adults, their innocent play turning into a chilling reflection of the nightmare. Merchants abandoned their stalls, their wares forgotten as they stared, horrified. The entire district began to reek, a sickening cocktail of sour wine, unwashed bodies, and the metallic tang of blood from the dancers' raw, bleeding feet. By the end of that week, city scribes, frantically trying to record the unfolding disaster, estimated that somewhere between 50 and 100 citizens were now caught in the grip of the dancing plague, unable to stop. The city council, terrified of social unrest spiraling into chaos, convened in emergency session. They consulted the most learned minds they had, the university-trained physicians, steeped in the ancient Galenic theories of medicine. The diagnosis they delivered, with a solemn air of authority, was overheated blood caused by an imbalance of the 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. This was the prevailing medical wisdom of the era, and to them, it made perfect sense. The cure? More movement, to burn the excess heat away, to sweat out the supposed toxins. So, in a decision that would prove disastrous, the council hired drummers and pipers, commissioning them to play relentless, driving rhythms. They even constructed a wooden platform beside the horse pond, a makeshift stage for the afflicted, and declared that anyone who felt the urge should dance it out. Can you even imagine the scene? A brass tabor banging a relentless 2-beat rhythm, the sound echoing off the half-timbered houses, a dizzying, maddening pulse. Flute trills, shrill and piercing, weaving through the oppressive heat. On the platform and spilling into the streets, the afflicted shuffled in endless circles, their arms flailing wildly, hair matted with dust, sweat, and sometimes vomit. Spectators, a mixture of fearful, fascinated, and perhaps even morbidly entertained, cheered them on, tossed coins onto the stage, and brought bread and weak ale, fueling this bizarre spectacle. The city fathers, in their desperate attempt to control a medical emergency, had inadvertently transformed it into a public entertainment, a macabre festival of death. It was a profoundly misguided intervention, one that would only amplify the tragedy. Chapter 3. The Collapse. The dance continued, but the mood shifted from morbid curiosity to outright horror. By day 15, the death toll was reportedly hitting 15 people a day. The relentless pace, the constant movement, the lack of food and water, all took their toll. The drummers, their hands aching and their faces grim, were exhausted. Replacements were hard to find and doubled their fees, sensing the desperation. The wooden platform, once a symbol of misguided hope, now creaked ominously under the weight of bodies, some still dancing with a terrifying energy, others merely twitching, some lying unconscious, their bodies finally giving out. A civic scribe, his hand undoubtedly trembling as he wrote, recorded that the air itself seemed poisoned by the thudding of feet, a constant sickening rhythm that permeated the entire city. Finally, a voice of reason, or perhaps just a voice of exasperated authority, intervened. The bishop, his patience worn thin by the escalating crisis and the mounting death toll, overruled the council's disastrous decree. He ordered the stages torn down, the musicians paid off and sent away, their instruments silenced. The dancers, or what was left of them, were to be carted away, a grim procession to the shrine of St. Vitus, located across the Rhine, 30 miles distant. Wagons, piled high with the worst cases, began the slow, agonizing journey through the oppressive August heat. Many, already on the brink of collapse, died en route, their bodies jostling lifelessly in the carts. Upon arrival at the shrine, the priests, taking a different approach from the city's physicians, forced the victims' swollen, bleeding feet into red shoes that had been sprinkled with holy oil. They then commanded them to pray, hoping that a combination of religious ritual, symbolic restraint, and perhaps sheer exhaustion would break the spell. Miraculously, or perhaps more accurately, coincidentally, the epidemic began to peak and then recede. Within 2 weeks, the numbers of dancers dwindled. The last recorded dancer, her spirit and body utterly spent, simply dropped from exhaustion on a country road. She slept for 3 days straight, a profound restorative slumber. When she finally woke, it was as if her mind had been wiped clean. She couldn't even remember her own name. Locals, attempting to make sense of the chaos, estimated roughly 400 people had been afflicted, and somewhere between 50 and 100 had died. But parish rolls were so chaotic, so incomplete, that the true figure of the dead remains anyone's guess, a chilling testament to the sheer scale of the tragedy. Chapter 4. Theories begin. So, 5 centuries later, what really happened? The human mind, ever eager for answers, has tossed around numerous theories. Let's start with the favorite Victorian explanation, one that still pops up in casual discussions today. Ergot poisoning. It sounds plausible, doesn't it? Rye bread, a staple of the medieval diet, especially in damp summers, can host a purple fungus called ergot. This fungus is packed with alkaloids, compounds chemically related to LSD. Eat enough of it, and you're in for a hellish ride. Hallucinations, violent thrashing, a terrifying sensation of your skin crawling, pins and needles, a burning sensation. Medieval peasants knew it as St. Anthony's fire, a gruesome illness causing convulsions, gangrene, and often death. On the surface, it seems like a perfect fit for the bizarre symptoms of the dancing plague. But here's where historians and toxicologists pour cold water on the theory. While ergotism can cause convulsions, it primarily constricts blood vessels. Victims of severe ergot poisoning are typically weak, barely able to stagger, let alone leap and thrash for days on end with the incredible endurance seen in Strasbourg. Furthermore, ergotism usually triggers other distinct and severe symptoms: gangrene, which would have been visibly obvious, severe vomiting, and debilitating diarrhea. None of these are consistently mentioned by the chroniclers describing the dancers. And then there's the uniformity. Why would an LSD-like trip, which is inherently individual and often terrifying, make everyone dance the exact same frantic jig for days, rather than, say, cowering in terror, speaking in tongues, or engaging in other varied behaviors? Modern toxicologists are pretty clear. While ergotism was a real and horrific medieval affliction, it simply can't explain the sustained, high-energy endurance marathon we saw unfold in 1518. The symptoms just don't align. Chapter 5. Mass psychogenic illness. If not poisoned bread, then what? Enter Theory 2, the one most widely accepted by modern scholars: mass psychogenic illness, or what your grandmother might casually call mass hysteria. Think about it. Picture a population already traumatized, utterly broken by successive catastrophes. There was the famine of the previous year, leaving widespread hunger and malnutrition. The plague, a specter that haunted every village, had ravaged them just the year before that. And then there was the constant, grinding warfare between feudal lords, making life precarious and uncertain. Add to this deep, pervasive religious dread. Sermons thundered from pulpits, warning that St. Vitus himself could strike sinners with uncontrollable dancing, a terrifying, divinely ordained punishment. Now, drop a charismatic index case into this highly combustible environment. Frau Trophäa, publicly and undeniably tormented. Her bizarre, involuntary movements, witnessed by so many, planted a powerful suggestion in the minds of a deeply stressed and superstitious populace. Psychologists today understand that under conditions of extreme stress, the human brain can do remarkable, even terrifying things. It can convert intense anxiety and fear into very real physical symptoms that then spread like a contagion, not through a virus but through shared belief and psychological mirroring. Consider the chilling parallel of the 1962 Tanganyika laughter epidemic. A simple classroom joke in a community already under significant social strain triggered 2 years of uncontrollable giggling fits that spread across villages. It wasn't funny. It was debilitating. The Strasbourgers, already steeped in the belief that dancing could be a curse, were uniquely susceptible. Once a few highly susceptible individuals began to mirror Frau Trophäa's movements, the idea of the dancing curse became a self-fulfilling feedback loop. The more people danced, the more credible the curse seemed, and the more likely others were to succumb. And what about the city council's initial disastrous intervention? Their endorsement, providing music, building stages, attracting crowds, unwittingly added a massive layer of social permission. It legitimized the behavior, amplifying the contagion, turning a contained outbreak into a citywide phenomenon. By the time the authorities realized their grave error and reversed course, the overwhelming stress and anxiety, the collective psychological pressure had, quite literally, danced itself out. The body, having expressed its internal turmoil in this extreme physical manifestation, eventually found release. Chapter 6. Religious Layers. But mass hysteria rarely unfolds in a vacuum, especially not in 16th century Europe. The psychological factors were undeniably potent, but they were deeply intertwined with the pervasive religious beliefs of the era. In 1518 Strasbourg, it wasn't just whispers. Sermons from the local clergy hammered home the idea that saints, like Saint Vitus, possessed immense power. They could both cause choreomania, the dancing curse, as a divine punishment for sin, and, crucially, they could also cure it. This dual belief system was fundamental to how people understood the world and their place in it. So, when the priests, after the bishop's intervention, loaded the victims onto wagons and carted them 30 miles to the shrine of St. Vitus across the Rhine, this wasn't just a physical journey, it was a profound spiritual and psychological intervention. The ritual itself, the pilgrimage to the saint's sacred ground, may have been the very thing that flipped the psychological switch off for many. Anthropologists refer to this concept as a ritual termination signal. It's a collective belief, powerfully reinforced by cultural and religious authority, that a higher power has finally revoked the curse, that the period of penance or affliction is officially over. Think about the elements involved: the forced fasting, the public confessions, the symbolic act of placing those red shoes sprinkled with holy oil onto their tormented feet. These weren't just random acts, they were potent rituals. The red shoes, in particular, could have functioned as symbolic manacles, physically and psychologically restraining the urge to dance, while also signifying a sacred protection. Faced with such powerful, culturally resonant cues, the brain, under immense strain for weeks, could finally stand down from its red alert state. The collective belief that the saint had intervened, that the curse was lifted through these prescribed actions, provided the mental framework for recovery. And note the timing. The pilgrimage to St. Vitus's shrine ends, and shortly thereafter, the epidemic ends. Coincidence? Perhaps. But the striking overlap between the religious intervention and the cessation of the dancing plague is a powerful piece of evidence suggesting that the religious and cultural context was not merely a backdrop, but an active ingredient in both the spread and the eventual demise of this terrifying phenomenon. It highlights how deeply interwoven the psychological, social, and spiritual realms were in medieval life. Chapter 7. Medical Missteps. Let's not ignore the doctors, shall we? The learned faculty at the University of Basel, the leading medical minds of the region, were operating under the strictures of Galenic theory, a system of medicine that had dominated Western thought for over 1,000 years. This theory posited that health was a delicate balance of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. An imbalance, they believed, was the root of all illness. When faced with the frenzied dancers, their diagnosis, as we discussed, was overheated blood. To them, it wasn't a metaphor. They genuinely felt the dancers' blood was literally boiling from some celestial heat or internal imbalance. And what was the logical, to them, remedy for excess heat? Evaporation. How do you make something evaporate? Through movement, through sweating. So, with all the scientific authority of the age, they prescribed the worst possible remedy: more exercise. Imagine telling someone in the throes of a full-blown panic attack to go run laps around the block. It's not just unhelpful, it's actively harmful. The city council's enthusiastic endorsement of this cure, hiring musicians, building a stage, encouraging public participation, acted like gasoline poured onto a psychic fire. What might have been a contained outbreak of psychological distress was, through official decree and medical advice, transformed into a citywide contagion. The very treatment intended to heal became a primary driver of the disease's spread and intensity. This is a classic, albeit tragic, example of iatrogenic harm. The treatment itself causes or worsens the illness. The doctors, acting with the best intentions and the best knowledge available to them, inadvertently exacerbated the crisis. Their cure provided a powerful social legitimization for the dancing, removing any lingering social inhibitions and effectively telling people, yes, this is normal, this is how you get better. It turned a medical emergency into a self-perpetuating public spectacle, a chilling reminder of how even well-meaning interventions based on flawed understanding can have devastating consequences. Chapter 8. Modern Parallels. Still think mass psychogenic illness is just some dusty, ancient history, a relic of superstitious times? Think again. The human mind, especially under pressure, remains remarkably susceptible to these collective phenomena. Fast forward to 2011, a high school in Leroy, New York, becomes the epicenter of a baffling outbreak. 20 teenage girls suddenly developed strange, involuntary facial tics, suffered seizures, and experienced garbled speech. Neurologists, baffled, tested for everything: toxins, viruses, environmental contaminants. Nothing. The eventual diagnosis? Mass psychogenic illness, turbocharged by the instant communication and peer pressure of social media, the shared anxiety, the rapid spread of information and misinformation created a fertile ground for physical symptoms to manifest. Or recall 2018, when hundreds of Cambodian garment workers, already toiling in stressful conditions, began fainting in shifts across multiple factories. Investigations pointed not to a physical cause, but to hysterical contagion sparked by rumors of chemical weapons, of bad spirits, of management trying to poison them. The underlying stress, the precariousness of their lives, and the power of suggestion combined to create a very real, physical response. These aren't isolated incidents. From fainting spells in schools to outbreaks of mystery illnesses in workplaces, modern science continues to observe and document cases of MPI. It serves as a stark reminder that humans remain fundamentally wired to mirror each other's bodily distress, especially when stress levels are high, explanations are scarce, and the collective mind seeks an outlet for its anxieties. The mechanisms might be slightly different, social media instead of town squares, but the core psychological vulnerabilities remain remarkably consistent across centuries. The dancing plague of 1518, for all its medieval strangeness, speaks to a very contemporary truth about the fragility and interconnectedness of our minds. Chapter 9. The Unanswered Bits. Despite the compelling arguments for mass psychogenic illness and the clarity it brings to the broad strokes of the dancing plague, gaps remain. And these gaps are what make the story so enduringly, deliciously unsettling. Why, for instance, did entire households succumb to the dancing while their next-door neighbors, living under identical conditions, remained completely untouched? Was it a matter of individual susceptibility, a stronger personality, or some unknown protective factor? And then there's the internal experience of the dancers themselves. Some chronicles mention dancers who smiled as though seeing angels, suggesting moments of profound euphoria or religious ecstasy, a form of dissociation from their physical pain. Yet others shrieked like damned souls, their faces contorted in terror. How could such wildly contrasting experiences coexist within the same affliction? And perhaps most baffling, how did they manage to maintain such perfect rhythm, often for hours on end, even as their bodies were breaking down? This isn't just random flailing. It was, for many, a coordinated, albeit involuntary dance. Mass hysteria provides an excellent framework for understanding the collective phenomenon, the spread, and the underlying psychological drivers. But the devil, as they say, is in the neurological details, the granular individual experiences that we, with our 5-century remove, simply cannot retro-diagnose. We can't interview Frau Trophea. We can't scan her brain. We can't ask her about the specific sensations or visions she experienced, the uniformity of movement, the sheer endurance, the sudden cessation. These are all hallmarks of MPI, yes, but the specific, visceral, subjective reality of those who danced until they died remains shrouded in an impenetrable fog. And it's precisely these unanswered questions, these whispers from the past, that keep the story of the dancing plague so hauntingly alive. Chapter 10. Your Turn. So here we stand, 5 centuries later, sifting through the evidence, debating whether a fungus, a saint, or sheer collective terror made a city boogie itself to death. Maybe it was a potent cocktail of all three, a perfect storm of environmental, psychological, and spiritual factors converging in a devastating way. Or perhaps, just perhaps, it was something entirely different, something we haven't even imagined yet, a manifestation of human vulnerability that defies our current understanding. History rarely hands us tidy, neatly packaged answers. Instead, it often dangles tantalizing mysteries, challenging us to look deeper, to confront the uncomfortable truths about ourselves. The dancing plague of 1518 is one such mystery, a chilling reminder of how fragile the human mind can be when pushed to its absolute limits, when fear and uncertainty become the dominant forces in a community. It forces us to acknowledge the power of belief, the influence of social contagion, and the profound ways in which our internal worlds can shape our external realities. In July of 1518, Strasbourg was a city on the brink. The grain stores were empty, the plague pits were still fresh in memory, and the heavens seemed utterly silent, offering no comfort. Then one woman danced, and the city, in a terrifying display of collective suffering, followed suit, until wooden boards were soaked red with blood and exhaustion claimed its victims. Modern science has given us a tidy label, mass psychogenic illness, a framework that helps us understand how such a thing could happen. But behind that label lies a chasm of unanswered questions, a profound mystery about the individual experience, the specific triggers, and the ultimate truth of what compelled these people to dance themselves to death. Perhaps that's the real enduring lesson. Humans can convince one another of almost anything, even that the only way to survive, to find release from an unbearable burden, is to keep dancing until you drop. What's your verdict? Was it poisoned bread, a psychological contagion run wild, or perhaps a divine curse that truly gripped the citizens of Strasbourg? Drop your theory in the comments below. The strangest, most thought-provoking explanation I read just might get pinned. If you enjoy walking the tightrope between history's most bizarre moments and its most terrifying, tap subscribe and ring that bell so you don't miss the next unsolved mystery we dive into. And hey, next time you feel your foot tapping to an earworm that just won't quit, maybe take a quick moment to check your sandwich and your stress level before it's too late. You never know what might be lurking.